All right, so I'll say that. So we're talking about you. We've been in this series called YOUnique. So we're talking about you, and today what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about passion. But before we jump into the passion part, what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit, like we've been talking about first job kind of stuff. And when I was growing up, I started working pretty young. So I actually wanted to. I was really excited to work. My mom was entrepreneurial growing up, and so when I was pretty young, I told her I was like, I want to start something. I want to work. I want to get going. And so I had this great idea that I was going to do like a lawn mowing business. Anybody else do lawn care stuff at one point? Yeah. And so my mom's like, okay, I'll give you if you can get 5 or 6 people to let you do it, then we'll go out and buy the supplies, and you pay me back from your first paycheck to get the lawnmower. We did the whole thing. The only problem was I'm allergic to everything outside, and not like a little bit, but like, you know when they do like the needle thing and to test you? The doctor literally looked at me, and my mom was like, should we give him allergy shots? And he goes, no, they don't help everyone. That's what he said. They just don't help everyone. And so it was so bad. But I convinced my mom, and then I started got nervous, and she goes, well, look, I just bought everything. You have to do it. And so back before N95 masks were cool, I had an N95 going, or whatever that big mask was, and I was mowing someone's lawn, and I was excited, and she was very excited that I was putting to use all the stuff that we got. And the problem was I mowed the entire lawn for $7, right? So this is the 90s. Yeah, that was a lot of money. That was a lot of money back then. Anyway, so we did that, and then I took the mask off, and I went to go to the lady that I did her house, and when I did, she looked at me like scared to death. And the reason was everything in the mask was white, normal, whatever. The rest of my face had welts like so big, so feel bad. My mom was like, oh my gosh, so we go to the hospital. It was a great experience, and that was the last lawn I mowed as a teenager. And so we got rid of all that stuff, and so she goes, well, we need to get you another first job. And there was a laundromat. You ever seen like the laundromat sort of things? It was right by our house. It was in walking distance. And the only problem with that one was I didn't like to fold clothes. In fact, when you get married, you like pre-negotiate the chores. You guys do this? Yeah, that was the one thing. I was like, I'll do anything you want. Now, do I do everything? No, but I said I would. I'll do anything except for the laundry folding stuff. But I showed up there, and I thought I was going to have like one of those big press machine kind of. This is what I envisioned. But my job was to fold all the laundry they had just finished, right, just so that they handed out to people. And I got there. I filled out all the paperwork. They told me what I was going to be doing. I had an hour to do it, and then I got a break, to which I went home and never went back, right? So those are my first two jobs. And my mom says, well, we're going to get you a third first job. And I was like, this isn't going well. And finally, she asked me these questions, which was actually super helpful. She goes, what is it that you actually love doing? What do you want to do? And at the time, it was all music for me. I'd go travel to these like battle of the bands, and everybody would do Blink-182. You guys are Blink-182 fans? Everybody did that. And then I would play Edwin McCain. You know what I mean? Like that was how I rolled. Or John Mayer, mostly John Mayer. Anyway, so I'd do these, and so it would be me and my acoustic guitar. My English teacher was in my band, that's a different thing. And so it was like I was not the cool version. But all of these punk rock guys wanted to record like little EPs. And so I was like, you know what? That would be fun. And so in high school, what I did to make money is I started something that I loved, which is around music. I found kind of my sweet spot in being good at something. I had a little recorder, and I recorded punk rock bands all the way through high school. And I made more money than I did in my first 3 adult jobs doing that, which was fun. And what was interesting to me is I'll never forget the conversation, though, that was so helpful. My mom talked to me about, she goes, what is it that you want to do? What do you love to do? What breaks your heart? That was one of the questions she asked her. What breaks your heart? What do you wish was kind of different? And I know this sounds really bad. I was like, these punk rock bands need to not sound so bad. You know what I mean? That was my thing. That was what we need to do. And so I built something around that. And you've heard me teach on this before. When you're figuring out like your unique sort of gifting and what you want to do, you think about like what breaks your heart. You think about where you're gifted. You think about where the opportunities are. But then many of us have done that work. And then what we do is we get into a job, and somewhere along the way, at some point you might have been passionate about it. At some point it might have been going well, but at some point for many of us, your passion for that thing starts to drift. And your belief in what you're doing at some point along the way, for many people, it begins to drift, and you begin to ask a question, and the simple question is this: is the work that I'm doing important? Like, does what I do matter? Now, here's what's interesting about it. You've also heard people with a microphone tell you, like, everything you do matters, and it's, everybody's making a difference. And the part of you that feels the emotions goes, yes. And then the logical part of your brain goes, no. You know what I mean? Like, there's a little bit of that where you feel that. You go, I don't know if what I'm actually doing matters. And as you drift in that, sometimes you drift in that because of your own passion shifting. Sometimes you drift in that because you have a bad boss. Can we just be honest? How many of you have had a bad boss? Anybody had like a really bad? Just be honest. Yeah, you've had that. Your passion drifts because of that. And then sometimes, nobody ever says this out loud, you just get bored. Like maybe you get good at it and then you're good, but now you're just kind of bored. And you think about like, what is the purpose of this thing? And then what oftentimes we'll do is we'll categorize it like this. We'll categorize work and often determine our effort, excellence, and passion based off of its perceived importance to us, right? You'll think about what you do, what you give your time to, and your perception of it actually creates sort of the drive for excellence or passion or those kinds of things in the midst of it, right? And you know this too. We can talk about what happens when you work. I mean, you get like the money that you acquire, and that can be a motivating factor, but it's never the only one, right? You know people who make a lot of money and are unhappy. You know people, maybe some of you, you've made a lot of money and you're also like, I would make less money to be happier doing other things, right? The other part about this, sometimes the driver for us is perceived influence. I'm involved in a role, or I'm involved in a leadership position or a management position because I like the idea of being influential. I just don't like having to lead people. Some of you ever felt that? Like we just go, I'm exhausted. And you keep it because of the perceived influence. But at the end of the day, there's a piece of you that you just get bored, you get tired, you get burnt out on those things. And then the other one is this, and again, this is always fun to talk about. You perceive that you're climbing a version of a ladder. And everybody's heard language like this before, but you know, they'll say like you're in this job for a season and then you'll go to the next one. And the idea, especially in Western culture, is you just keep doing this until finally you're, I don't know, Steve Jobs. I mean, that's the end goal that nobody ever tells you, but you also go, if I had to walk through all of that, is that really what I want? And what many of us feel and what many of us find ourselves doing is in the midst of some point of our work, there becomes a question that's internal to us. And you do this. You start looking inward and you start evaluating yourself, right? And as you're evaluating yourself, it gets really fascinating because you think about all of the time that you spend working in whatever you do, right? And you look at how many hours a week you spend doing it. You look at how long many of us are going to do it, and you go, man, that's a lot. I mean, just think about it like this. If you took age 20 to like 65, we'll just do 20 to 65, and then you get 2 weeks of vacation every year, you do this sort of thing, what you're going to really do is you're going to work about 93,600 hours over the course of your life. And then you pause and you go, am I doing something that's important? Am I doing something that matters? And the part of that that's hard is you can look at this and you can look at it through the lens that we talked about earlier, like what breaks your heart and what are you passionate about and what are your giftings. And you may look at that and go, I match up with 2 of those 3 things, or maybe not all 3, but you feel guilty for even thinking about this. Or you think of it like this, you think like, I have my work stuff, but then I have a side hustle that I really love, but I've been like, I don't know if I could step out and do that kind of thing. And the ultimate question for you is what I'm doing mattering, or does it make a difference? Now, here's what I'm going to tell you for those of you who are not followers of Jesus. My answer to this question will be wildly unsatisfying to you. Is that all right? Can we just say that? In fact, what we're going to talk about for the next few minutes, I would say it doesn't apply to you and what we're going to talk about because you haven't agreed on the idea, the principles that we're going to discuss. In fact, this would be, I say this all the time, this would be one of those things that it doesn't make Christianity seem easier. It actually makes it seem harder. And then for those of you who are followers of Jesus, what I would say is this. Many of us have done all the things that I just talked about and zoomed in so tight to one specific area or piece of unhappiness or driven sort of thing that we have found ourselves incredibly unhappy or not passionate or whatever those things are because we've missed that wherever we are, the ultimate goal isn't just the work that we're producing. It's about the people that we're impacting, right? I put in my notes to say it this way. The work that you do, whatever the work is that you do, it will reach beyond you to some degree. Now, I will say all of the things about your alignment of your passion and all the things around your gifting and all those things matter. And most people, especially in America, will have multiple jobs over the course of their career. And absolutely. But at the end of the day, if your end goal centers around influence or money or climbing some sort of ladder, that end goal will always leave you disproportionately empty in your life. It just will. And it doesn't even matter if you're like, I kind of like it. But if there's a piece of you that's the end goal, you will always feel a little bit empty. And so for those people who are followers of Jesus, the question for us is this: how do we work in a way that God has called us to work? And I believe deeply, when you look at Genesis and the beginning of the scriptures, you look all throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament, there's this beautiful picture about how God has ordained the work that we do, even if we're not like in a full-time job, like that sort of thing. Many people are stay-at-home parents, those kinds of things. You feel that, I mean, come on, that is work. You know what I'm saying? Can I get an amen on that? There's a little bit of that, that's even more work than a lot of you. You know what I'm saying? There's a little bit where you go, you feel the weight of that. Whatever it is that you spend your time doing to producing, like that. It is work and it is God ordained, and God has a plan for that sort of thing. So what we're going to do for the next few minutes is we're going to look at a few different passages of scripture. And if you're not a follower of Jesus, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you what I think a Christian worldview around our work ethic is. And if you are a follower of Jesus, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say some things today that are a little bit uncomfortable for most of us and are frustrating to the vast majority of us. And at the same time, bring the most clarity to what it looks like to follow Jesus in places where we might not feel passion around what we're currently doing. So we're going to look at a passage of scripture. The first one we're going to look at is in Matthew chapter 5. It's one of my favorite areas of the Bible. It's written by a guy named Matthew who gives us all sorts of fun details around Jesus' life. It's a lot of a biography around what Jesus did. And so Matthew chapter 5, this is what it says. You get this interesting picture, and you get a line that we're going to explain and that you've heard before. But it's Jesus teaching out, and he says this. He says, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile. So he's talking about what it looks like to serve people and to love people who are hard to love, all these sorts of things. He says, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile. Now, the imagery that he's teaching on is actually one that's connected to Rome, and all of the sort of context around this is connected to an idea that there was like a Roman mile, which is roughly 1,000 paces, about 1,600-ish yards. And what happened is, if you were asked to do this, if you were asked to like carry something like this or carry something in the Roman mile, oftentimes the implication is you're going to carry something really heavy for a long period of time on behalf of somebody else. And so the context around what he's going to teach about is around this. And what he says, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile or asks you to carry or do this sort of thing for them, here's what he says. He goes on and he says this. He says, go with them 2 miles. So your response when it comes to your work or doing things on other people's behalf or putting your hand to work like this, you don't just go 1. What you're going to do as a person who's a follower of the way and exists in this new kingdom is you're going to go double on their behalf. You go 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you, which is not found in any Western culture self-help book that is not in your HR training. Come on, that is not in Quiet Quitting. You do not see this on TikTok. You know what I mean? Like, that is not what's going on. The teaching here is that as people who are followers of the way, and don't miss this, and representing what the new kingdom is that we give our lives, don't miss this, on behalf of other people. Now, you know the phrase, you've heard the phrase all the time, right? Managers use this all the time. You go the extra mile, which we don't talk about hardly at all anymore. Now, if you're a manager in the room or a leader, you know this. There's a piece of you that goes, if I could just convince everybody who worked with me to go the extra mile, right? But it's hard. And there's a piece of this where you go, there's all sorts of things attached to this too. And so I'm kind of debunk some of this. I'll try to do it carefully. There's a piece of this where you go like, I'm going to focus on me to protect my own whatever. I don't want to work too much, all this. And I'll say, that is true. And taken too far, it's deadly to your soul. As long as your primary end goal focus is so internal like that, and the only question you ask is about yourself, you can't die to yourself to give your life on behalf of other people, right? Now, again, should you be healthy in this? Absolutely. Should you have boundaries in your life? Absolutely. But if you are only known as the person who clocks in and clocks out and checks the box and you're done, come on, no one else is going to look around and go, man, I'm just so grateful for you. And here in the context, and we'll talk about this even more, there is a deep bond that's created by the people who pick up the weight and go further than people who just go, I did and it's all on you now, right? And at the end of the day, this is what the emphasis on Jesus in the new kingdom is around, and he teaches on this all over the New Testament, all over the New Testament, is you are dying to yourself on behalf of people that are around you. And then he goes on, he says this, he goes on. It gets worse, it's great. He says, you have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Which again, in the context of this, you've watched Rome, you've watched all of these sort of provinces, especially, it's all about power. It's not even just about wealth. It is about wealth, but it's about conquering and getting more, an insatiable desire for more. And if they're not contributing to your more in some way or capacity, they are your enemy. He said this, you've heard this. Love your neighbor and hate, meaning stand against, right? Stand against your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies, which has the context around sacrifice. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be, and I don't miss this. This is strong language around this, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. I don't miss, this is the image of this, ready? Like when people see our kids, we talk about this sometimes, me and Emily, but we'll go like, we want them to just know that they're our kids. We say Team Holden at our house all the time, right? Because we're a team doing something together. We're on mission. We have values. I run an organization in our home. No, I'm just kidding. But there's a little bit of that where like, but there's a piece of this where you go like, if you meet our kids, I want you to go, oh, that's Emily and Patrick's son. That's Emily and Patrick's daughter. I want you to feel that, right? And this is the context around this is you know when you meet some people's kids whose kids they are. And you know that not just because of how they look, but because of their value set, the things that they say. You feel all those things. In the teaching here, he's going, you should be known by whose you are. And a critique, come on, you know this, a critique of followers of Jesus in our Western culture is that sometimes it's very hard to distinguish whose Christians are, right? There's a much better way to say that that's grammatically correct, but you get what I'm saying, right? Like that, it is very, very hard sometimes to figure that out. And he goes, that you'll be known as children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good. Can we just cross that out? You know what I mean? Like that God causes, notice this, the sun to rise on both and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. Come on, for those of you who go, if you do evil, you shouldn't be blessed. And also, sometimes they are. And praying for your enemies, I say this all the time, I'm like, praying for your enemies is really hard, especially when they bump up against something that matters to you. But the posture of those that are followers of the way are those who say, I'm going to self-sacrifice. I'm going to give myself on behalf of those who would be perceived as my enemy. Then he goes on and he says this. He says, but to you who are listening, even in 2024, to you who are listening, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, and pray for those who mistreat you. And I always just like to put an ellipses, but except for fill in the blank. And he's like, no. But you know the reason why, and this is the context of everything that Jesus teaches in this, isn't just so that you're kind, because that's dumb. It's so that you represent whose you are and the new kingdom that is advancing in the world. Now, you've heard it said in so many different ways and in so many different philosophical conversations that if you continue to keep the circle going of whatever evil is, it just continues on. And this is what's so fascinating about the early church followers, or the early Christ followers of the time, is they said, if there is a circle of pain, a circle of injustice, a circle of things that feel like unending evil, it will stop with me. And the question is, and to what degree? Whatever it takes from me. And again, this is where you go like, is there another version of Christianity? You know what I mean? Like, there's not. This is what they modeled. This is what Jesus modeled on your behalf. And this is what it looks like to be a follower of Jesus. And you get this other area of the Bible. It was written by a doctor named Luke. And you get all sorts of like specific details, but he's bringing on teaching that was taught very similar to this. In Luke chapter 6, it says this. It says this. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also, which we'll talk about that in a second. And if someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. Which, can we just be honest? No. There's a piece that goes like, I want things to be made right through me on this. And you go, no. How do you stop the reversing of the cycle that happens? We have, most of you know this, a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, and they're just in that phase where they start fighting more and more and more and more, you know? And there's a part of this, you know this, and I didn't grow up with siblings, so I didn't have anybody to blame it on. But you know this, the one who gets in trouble is rarely the one who starts it. It's the one who keeps it going. You know what I'm right? There's something about this as a parent that nobody taught me this. But I was like, I don't even get that frustrated with the person who started it. I'm frustrated that they keep going because then I got to deal with it. You know what I mean? There's a little bit of this. I was like, y'all are like messing with each other. And then it's just like, and come on, what's the phrase? The one who you always hear it. Well, he started or she started. It wasn't me. I was just righting the wrong that was created that he did or she did, you know? We do this in marriage too. Come on, you know this, right? It's like, well, you started the fight. What was it about? I don't remember. You know what I mean? But it was on you. I was just responding to what you said. You were reacting. I'm responding. You know, there's a little bit of that. Where you go like, come on, we point over here. It started here. But again, followers of Jesus break the cycle. And it's not about weakness. Because what do you want? I'll tell you what I want. Every part of my personality is wired this way. I take all these personality tests. I want them every time to be a little bit different. They all say some version of, I want justice. You know what I mean? I want things to be made right. And I want to be the instigator of making it right. You know, every part of me is like that. Every part of my default personality resists feeling manipulated, feeling like things aren't right, seeing something else happen, you know? And also, there's a component of this that goes, hey, that's not always mine to do. It goes on and it says this. I love it. It says, if you love those who love you, so blunt. This isn't like Jesus holding a lamb, sweet Jesus, right? This is, if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. Or more bluntly put, it's too easy. Even people who do it the opposite, even people you disagree with, do that way. And then he goes on to reemphasize the point. Verse 35, it goes on, it says, but love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. And the premise of this is always fascinating because I grew up with the word respect, right? I was a respect everybody. And at some point you get to an age where you go, I just don't. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just don't respect everybody. It's not that I want to disrespect them, but I don't naturally respect everybody. Why? Because I saw what you did. You know, there's a little bit of that. But respect is very different than honor. And what happens throughout the New Testament, you see this, is the call for much of this is to, you honor everyone. Honoring somebody who's your enemy, yeah. Honoring somebody who is disrespectful to you, yeah. Honoring that boss that you can't stand, yeah. You can honor them even if you don't respect them. A friend of mine said it this way, that your concern for those far away from God is most illuminated in the way that you treat those who feel far away from you. Right? Why? Because even sinners can do the other. But what's illuminated through your life is how you treat those people where there is a gap and it feels far away from you. And this is one of those things about your work environment that's true. Everybody's got that person or that group of people over here that you don't like. Everybody in every company and every sort of thing has some version of that. Most people have had a boss or will have a boss. Sitting under a bus, some of you are sitting right next to a boss, right? There's a piece of, I'm just kidding. There's a piece where you go, you feel that, you will, and that's a part of it. And you may never have the respect, but you can and should, as a follower of Jesus, learn to honor those people. Area of the Bible called Colossians, the writer talks about this, and it's so fascinating. It's so interesting to me, the way that this is phrased and framed. It says this, in a very different culture where obviously slaves were a part of this culture, I always give a preface. This is not an endorsement of slaves at all, right, at all. In fact, I could talk all day long about New Testament principles around this. But saying, if you're existing as a slave, this is how you should. Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything, and do it not only when their eye is on you and to curry their favor, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. And this is one of those things that's so hard to talk about. You go like, wait a minute. There's a piece of this where I can honor in public, but honoring in private somebody that I don't respect is a very different thing. Right? Not just to gain influence or a thumbs up or to make my life easier, but again, laying down myself for the other, even if the other is wrong in that way. Then it goes on. It says this, whatever you do, and many of you heard this. Some of you grew up hearing this around church. Whatever you do, work at it with all of your heart as if you're working for the Lord, not for human masters. This is what the first thing of HR would be great with. Can you imagine walking into HR, your first day, and here's your packet. It's Colossians 3. You know what I mean? Like, what does that look like? Look, you're laying yourself down over and over and over and over. Why? Because you don't work for them. Because you don't just serve them. Because what you produce isn't just about a bottom line. It is for the people around you. Then it goes on, it says this. It says, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. And it is the Lord Christ that you are serving. Anyone who does wrong, this is, some of y'all like this part. This is fun. This is my favorite part. Anyone who does wrong will be repaid for their wrongs. And there is no favoritism. I don't like that part, but I like the rest of it. You know what I mean? There's a piece of this where you go, look, it is not yours to repay. It is not yours. And you see this throughout Scripture. It is his. Now, some of the hard part around this, for those of you who are followers of Jesus, I'll just tell you, is we don't actually believe there's a reward. And that rewards certainly drive your motivation at times. Some of you, can we just be really honest? Some of you don't actually, like practically believe that there's anything that's after your life here. And if you don't actually believe that, I mean, come on, you know this, then you're waiting for whatever your best life is here and now and in this moment, and neglecting something that is far greater and for far longer than what you experience here. And the early church, this is why this is actually so important. The early church was so convinced that this wasn't all that there was. The early church was so convinced that at the end of the day, that Jesus would redeem all things back to himself, that they were so convinced of it, that what happened in the here and now mattered, but what mattered more than anything to them was that, come on, everyone in their sphere of influence would know what this new kingdom was. Everyone. And I'll tell you how you really practically know, if you can point to beyond this life and believe that there's anything else, is you look at the places of pain that cause your pain and you recognize, is the full weight of this current situation or pain worth me going, that I'm so preoccupied with it that I forget what is to come. And I'll just tell you, I think the vast majority of people, Emily and I talk about this all the time. I'll corner her in long road trips with theology conversations because she can't get away. You know, it's fun. And we were driving to Orlando one day, and all the kids are asleep. It was like 5:30 in the morning, so what's up, baby? Anyway, so there's a little bit, you want to talk theology? Anyway, she didn't, but we did. And I looked at her, I was like, I'll tell her all the time, I am so wildly convinced of this. If you believe that there's anything after this life, it pulls you in a direction towards something that's beyond you. I said, if we really believe that there was something more beyond this, the only thing that would matter is that thing. And you know how you know that? Math, right? You get 70, 80, 90 years, and eternity is more than that. You know, like there's a little bit of that. And you know, there's a piece of you that you go, and it causes you as a Christian to go, do I actually believe that this is what Ecclesiastes talks about, is like a vapor, a breath that comes and it goes. And if you do, it pulls you in another direction. You've met people like this. You've met people who are just so convinced by it that things will happen and that they don't feel less pain. They're just not moved by everything. I thought about this in the last election. This is kind of fun. I'm in my mid-30s, right? And then I think people that are my age, in their 20s, people, for the last whatever few elections that have happened, it's always fascinating to me. Everything is so like, you know what I mean? And you know who's not doing like the, oh my gosh, the world's ending, kind of falling apart thing? Anybody who lived 40 years ago. Most of them aren't going, I don't know what's going to happen. They're not doing that. Most of them are going, yeah, we've seen some version of this and some version of this, some version of this. And we've seen this, and they're just not different. And then you talk to people that are followers of Jesus in this camp, and they go, yeah, and this isn't all that there is. There's something about, oftentimes, age that pulls you into recognizing that this isn't all there is. That actually what makes us feel this sort of thing is our current desires and our anchor point to what we actually want here and not longing for the beauty that is to come. So in light of that, be nice to your boss. All right. I'm just kidding. All right, go on to the next one is this. Around this is why we choose excellence. And excellence isn't just about producing for the man or your company. It's actually about communicating what God has already done with the world, right? We choose excellence in our work because it matters. And we're doing what we do at a high level for him, not everybody else. In my notes, I said this. I'm sure I stole this from Spotty. I wish I could have tell you who it was. I don't know. Much smarter than me. The audience for your behavior is and will forever be your Savior. Always. Are you doing spreadsheets? Come on. I don't even understand how Excel works most of the time. But you put formulas in, that's fantastic. And you do that for him, not just your boss. You're serving people, right? I have a friend that's an occupational therapist, and she tells me stories about things she does. I'm like, that is wild how well you serve people. And she goes, no, I'm not doing it for them. I'm doing it for him. I mean, for them, but I want them to see, you'll hear people say this, I want them to see Jesus in me, which feels so cheesy until someone sees Jesus in you, and then it's not. Because it's gritty and it's messy and it's hard, right? I heard somebody say this one time and I thought it was so good. For those of you who are not followers of Jesus, I think it's very true, but for those of you who are, what you want people who are not followers of Jesus to say about you is some version of, I don't agree with them on religion or even on their morality, but they are the best team members. Or that is the best ran company. Or man, they are the best teacher. Or they are the best, fill in whatever the blank is, man, they are the best. And you know why? Not for you. So that it gets connected to who you're doing it for. Because your work is not just about you, right? Your work is about how God might use you wherever you are. Because your life is not just about the 70, 80, 90, 100, 110, we'll see what Neuralink does, years you get, It's about eternity. It's about whose you are. And your life ultimately is either about other people seeing that or it's not. And if you're a follower of Jesus, you don't get to choose. Enemies, kind of enemies, friends, kind of friends, best friends, family members, mother-in-laws, parents, all of it. I want all of it. It is for others. Now, I'm going to tell you a quick story, and then we're going to wrap up our time. I was trying to think of the best way to, how do I tell you this? But when I was in college, I worked at a church, and I worked a lot of hours, but mostly because of me, because I loved it. And then I was like, I also need some more money for gas, because gas ain't free, theologian Dwight Schrute. And I thought to myself, I need to figure that out. And so I started working at a restaurant. And there are some people that are great at that, and there are people like me who are introverted and very not great at that. But I was like, I'm going to do it. And so my first day on the job, a kid ordered, some of you heard me tell this before, shrimp on a skewer. I didn't know the skewer was pointed. I also didn't know they cooked the shrimp on the skewer, which I found out when I took my finger through the little ring and I went to put it on his plate. And then I threw it at the child. So that was a fun day. That was a fun day. I wasn't winning, And it was so fascinating, but they didn't fire me, thank God, that day. And so what would happen, the way we did this, I was a server, and we got tips, and some of you have been in the service industry, and there's so many different ways to do this, but we would tip out. We'd tip out to the bartender, and we'd tip out to people who like bust the tables and this sort of thing. And I had some friends, one of my closest friends were some of the guys that bust the tables, and they were really great. One of the guys' name was Hector. And Hector was probably in his like mid-40s at the time. He's busting tables. And so what happened is, as servers, you got to, this is fascinating. It's the weirdest business model to me. You got to decide how much you're going to tip out to the guys and tip out to the bartender. And I wasn't making a lot of tips, so they weren't getting a ton, but I was giving them what I could do. I'd do the percentage thing. And, but we had a boss who was kind of like the manager of the store. And have you ever seen anybody who, like, when the main boss is around is phenomenal, and then when the main boss is not there, it's like, you are not a good human. You know what I mean? And that was him. And what he would do, he would publicly humiliate people. He was just, I mean, he's just not a good dude. He's just awful human. Anyway, so he was just not good. But the people that he was the least good to was my friend Hector and some of the people that were on their team. And the way that it worked is you would tip out to them, that sort of thing. And so we would all do that at the end of the night. Well, the boss, like the second boss, the guy that I most interacted with, again, he was not good to me. Like, he just wasn't. And one night we had a server call off, so he had to be one of the servers, which he didn't do very often. So he put on a little fanny pack thing. What do you call that? I don't even know what you call that. What, apron. That's the word. I was not good at this job. Yeah. And he goes out, and for the entire evening, it's like a Friday night, he served with us. And Hector was there, busting tables, the team of people were. And again, this guy, throughout the night, was yelling at people, humiliating people, all this kind of stuff. And at the end of the night, what he did is he took it off and set it on a table. And what we think happened is one of the people saw money in his little apron and took all of the manager's money out of the apron. And he was not happy about that either and went off, right? Lost his mind. And partly because he lost his mind is he lost all of the money that he was going to make that night too. I mean, several $100s at this place. Logan Steakhouse in Cleveland, Tennessee, hopping. And we got there, and Hector was in the back, and he grabs me. And it sounds like such a preacher story, but it's really true. He takes all of the money that they had already tipped him out. Again, not several $100s, but a few $100s. Takes this out and gives it to me. And he said, I want you to give this to, which I'm tempted to name his name, but I won't do it. I want you to give this to him, that manager. And I went, no. No. He's like, no. I want you to give this to that manager. And I looked at him, because I didn't understand this. I'm 20 probably at the time. And I was like, look, I actually said it. I was like, look, this guy, and I used a word that I won't use here. I was like, he's that, you know, and he's just not a great guy. Like, I heard what he said about you tonight. Like, they were just, and I'll never forget this. He looks at me, and he goes, I don't work for that man, but God might have put me here from him. And I said, shut up. I'm studying to be a pastor, not you. You know what I mean? Like, you know? He goes, God might have put me here for him. And he said this, don't tell him I gave you the money. And then I want you to give it to him and tell him it was anonymous. And what bothered me about it was if you're going to do it, get some credit. You know what I mean? If you're going to do it, let it be seen. If you're going to do it, and he's like, I want you to give it to him. And I gave it to the guy. And what would be great in the story is if the guy was like, oh, then he gave his life to Jesus right there. No, he was still a jerk. You know what I mean? Like, he still wasn't a good person. He still made fun of Hector. He still made fun of me. I lasted about 3 more weeks on that job. Like, I kept up with Hector for quite a while. But I'll never forget it. He's like, God might have put me here for him. And I just thought to myself, I was like, I don't ever think like that. I was like, cool. Did you take his money? I'm cool if you took it, bro. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm good if you did it. Like, that's where I'm at. Like, come on, you know? But he literally gave all that he had that night, and then he left, and he walked 3 miles to where he lived. And I almost hesitate to say it because it's almost like one of those, like, of course he's got a preacher story for that. And except we shouldn't be calloused to that kind of living. Because that kind of living is what you are called to. That kind of living is what you're called to with the people that are not good to you and the people that God has put around you. And it's not for you, and it's not for your kindness, and it's certainly not for your own piety. It's because you are a representative of something that is so much bigger than you, that will outlive you here. And if you are a follower of Jesus, you are not driven by the temporary. You are driven by the eternal. And until we find that, the critiques around Christians and Christian living and the hypocrisy stuff, a lot of times it's accurate. But we don't have to be that. And so a friend of my notes said this way. I was like, imagine if, right? Imagine if every person that said they were a follower of Jesus, that they were the people who went the extra mile in their work, whether they felt passionate about it or not. Imagine if every person was a follower of Jesus, that they worked with the highest degree of excellence, that you were known in your company or wherever it is that you do work as the best one at what you do. Imagine if we treated everyone with unconventional, don't miss this, not respect, because you can't force respect, but unconventional honor. That they never deserve, that they don't deserve, but that you choose to give them anyway because, and this is where we'll wrap up our time with this, because God uses your work always to work in the lives of other people. And when you recognize that, then you begin to realize, don't miss this, that your passion, your gifting, the season of life that you're in, at whatever company you're in, or whatever it is that you're doing, it may be temporary, but you are there for a reason, for a season, for whatever it is that you're doing, as a representative of something that's so far beyond you that matters so much. So I'll tell you what we've done throughout the series. And if you're new to our church, I know it can feel a little bit different or not awkward necessarily, but it's a little bit different. But we've just given you a minute to like pause and process a little bit of what we've talked about. And what I want to do today is going to be a little bit different than what we've done. But I know this, that most of us are so busy, it's hard to pause and just reflect on things like this. But I want to give you just a second to do that. And what I'm going to ask you to do is pretty simple. Josh is going to play here in just a second for no other reason than to help us stay focused. I need something like that to help me pause and stay focused. I was working on some of this talk today in my office, and I have classical music playing in the background, so maybe it's just for me, but I think it helps people just to focus. So what I'm going to ask you to do is for a second, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes just for a second, and just for a minute, I want you to focus in on you. And if you're here and you're not a follower of Jesus, I know that we probably differ on some of what we talked about, but a lot of this will also apply to you. And so the first question for you that I would really ask you is, and it's fairly simple, like, do you feel like you're thriving in your work right now? Like, do you feel like you're thriving in what it is that you do? Do you feel like for you, your passion and your gifting and all of that kind of stuff, do you feel like you're thriving in it? We're going to ask the band to come up too. You guys go ahead and come on up as well. You feel like you're thriving in it. Second question around that is, if you answered yes to that, why? And if you answer no to that, I want to know why too. Like, why do you feel like you might not be thriving? Is there a passion gap? Is there a pain point? Is there somebody that you are like, maybe like talking with, or a boss where it's just felt like, hey, disconnected or something like that? Maybe they're not a good person. Why do you feel like you're not thriving, or why do you feel like you are? And then for those of us who are followers of Jesus, it's a fairly simple question, but just as a moment for you to like think about this, how often do you give your work to God as a sacrifice? Like, do you think about that? When was the last time that you prayed and said, God, this day is yours, my work is yours? When was the last time that you did that? And then when was the last time that you meant it? You know? Like, you saw whatever it is that you were doing as important, not because of the money that you were getting or those kinds of the influence, but you saw it as important because it was for him. Now, I'm going to ask you just for a second. For some of you, this is an imaginative type thing, and I knew that, but I want you just for a second to dream for a second. If you were to take your passion and your gifting, what you feel like God put you here to do, what breaks your heart, what would you do if you weren't afraid, or you didn't feel confined by financial resources? Or what would you do if all of it was unlimited and you knew that you would succeed at the end? What was the thing that you might feel drawn to do? Some of you haven't thought about that since you were a teenager. Some of you, it was a dream that died years and years ago. What's that thing that you would do if you were confident that God were with you? And then shifting gears to the other side, if you think about where you are now, my question for you now is, we talked a lot about bosses or some of the pain that comes with working or people in it. I think my other question for you in this is there somebody that you need to forgive so that you can feel passion again? What's the name of the person? We talked about forgiveness a lot last week, but is there somebody that you need to forgive or a person that you need to see as a child of God again? And I want you to think about that name. Like, it's a name. What is that name for you? Now, here's what I'm going to ask you to do, if you would. I'm going to ask you, just for a minute, to open your eyes, and I'm going to ask you to stand up. And this is the part that, again, many of us don't do, but it's something that I want to teach you. So if you would, I'm going to ask you to stand up just for a second. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do. It might feel odd for some of you, and you don't have to, but I'd love to do this. One of the ways that I was taught to start my day, that I start my day most of the time in our bathroom. I get out of bed, I head in there. Generally, our kids are up before me, so it's pretty loud in our house. But I take a minute most days. In privacy of my own home, nobody's around to do this, but I'm gonna tell you what I do. I put both hands out like this, and here's what I say. I say, God, I want you to take my day and take my work and use it. And it's a simple prayer, and there's an open-handedness to it. So here's what I'm going to do, or I want you to do, and then we're going to wrap up. I'll give you a couple of announcements at the end. They're going to sing before we wrap up. But I'm going to ask you if you would, to put both hands out like this. And we're going to pray this just over our week. And so in your mind, your heart, however you want to pray it, and then I'm going to pray for you like this as well. Just for a second, I want you to pray that prayer. God, I give you my week. I give you my work week. God, I give you that boss. I give you those people. I give you my lack of passion at times. And then invite him in and say, God, I want you to take all of that and use it. So, Father, we thank you for that. God, we thank you that this week, as we leave here, there'll be a few hundred people that walk through these doors today, that we go out into the workplaces that we're in, the homes that we're in, whatever it is that we spend our time doing and producing. God, we give it all to you, and we trust you with it. We ask that you would use it, you would take our efforts, and that you would use it. God, we ask that you would multiply them, and that you would give us influence with the people around us. God, we thank you for that. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, so here's